Amazon Watch, we work with indigenous communities who are trying to defend their land from oil companies, from agribusiness, from mining companies, and from mega dams. So we were formed in 1996. Our co-founder is still our director. Her name is Atosa Sultani. So this is a film right here about Chevron's legacy of contamination in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and this is a trailer for it. It sort of sets the scene. I can speak more to it afterwards.
What was once paradise now has just been left in destruction.
The total area in which Texaco polluted is about the size of the state of Rhode Island. We are suing for environmental cleanup.
The plaintiff's accusation is defamatory and not true. It's just false and wrong.
Es que hoy decenas de hombres y mujeres están padeciendo cáncer y están muriendo en la actualidad.
Chevron takes those kinds of allegations very seriously. There's absolutely no evidence that there's an increase in cancer.
Chevron is fighting the claim, and the men who they say have made up their story for their own financial gain.
The analysis of our water and soil samples are proving that they're guilty of massive contamination.
Esto no es contaminación. Esto es una explotación industrial permitida por la ley.
So we're going down to have a little chat with the judge today. This is something you would never do in the United States. But Ecuador, you know, this is how the game is played. It's dirty.
Usted es un abogado corrupto. Usted es un abogado corrupto de Texas.
People are fed up with corruption. They're fed up with foreign oil companies. They just had it.
Where is her cancer? In the liver. These people have been systematically poisoned.
We've sampled every stream, and it has nothing to do with oil. It has to do with poor sanitation.
This is about some of the most marginalized people on earth. Fighting one of the most powerful companies in the world.
Texaco hizo cualquier barbaridad de cosas. Texaco responde por lo de él.
When you look at the science, they cannot really prove their case.
In fact, we're having a trial. It's a miracle. It's a huge victory.
So that film came out in 2009, and within the last 2 years, there was a $19 billion verdict for the plaintiffs for 30,000 people in the Ecuadorian Amazon. Unfortunately, Chevron is still refusing to pay. So I'll back up a little bit, sort of to the beginning of the story. So back in 1964, when oil was first discovered in Ecuador, in the Ecuadorian Amazon, Chevron came in, and they spent 28 years there exploiting the Ecuadorian Amazon. There are about 30,000 people who live in that area. And I think there are a number of factors associated with their history there. First of all, you have to understand that the area completely changes when oil companies come in and they build roads, they create cities, they bring alcohol and prostitution and everything associated with oil development in the middle of the jungle. So in addition to sort of the physical health toll that communities take, there's also a lot of cultural destruction. There were two communities living in voluntary isolation who wanted nothing to do with the outside world, who disappeared shortly after Texaco's sort of venture into the Ecuadorian Amazon. So one thing that's a little bit confusing is that sometimes I'll say Chevron and sometimes Texaco. What happened is that in 2001, Chevron acquired Texaco. So while we started a fight against Texaco, it's now against Chevron. So there was a 28-year period in which Texaco was essentially culturally and physically poisoning people in the Ecuadorian Amazon. There were laws in every oil-producing region of the United States that forbid Texaco from doing what they were doing in Ecuador. So there are, I think, about 900 open waste pits in the northern Ecuadorian Amazon, where instead of re-injecting produced water into the ground, they would just dump oil into these open, unlined waste pits, and oftentimes would have pipes that would lead directly into rivers in case they would overflow. So it was a way to save, I think on average they saved $3 of every barrel of oil by doing this, but it led to at least 1,400 deaths associated to cancer and tens of thousands of illnesses in the Ecuadorian Amazon, in addition to sort of unlimited cultural and ecological toll. So I'll step back a bit as well. So there are several different groups that live in this region. There are a few indigenous groups that include the Secoya, the Siona, the Wairani, and the Quechua, which are all indigenous nationalities, indigenous nations essentially, who live in the northern Ecuadorian Amazon. And the Kofan as well. The Kofan now number, in a traditional setting, the communities who are still living as Kofan is only 80 now, after Chevron, after Texaco's sort of presence, impact in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And with their presence came a lot of what in Spanish you call colonos, sort of colonists who lived there as well. And a lot of the people who were impacted by Chevrons, by Texaco's contamination, were those colonists. So there's been sort of, while there is division between these different groups, because of the history, because a lot of the colonists have taken indigenous land, and in fact a lot of indigenous communities left the area where Chevron started to operate, because they weren't able to hunt or fish near roads or near areas where there were tons of oil spills or tons of noise. It would scare away all the monkeys. So when that happened, the colonists came in, and it sort of created this decades-long tension. And finally, when the case started in 1993 against Texaco, these groups started to come together and started to sort of repair some of the divisions that had been created for decades. So the case started off back in 1993 in New York, and it was started by the main American lawyer you see there, Stephen Donziger, and also he was the main lawyer on the case, and also had some Ecuadorian lawyers. Pablo Fajardo was the main one who you see in that as well. And so Texaco at that point was able to move the case from New York to Ecuador. They essentially promised the judge, they said that the Ecuadorians, these 30,000 plaintiffs, have no jurisdiction here in the United States. There can't be any kind of judgment that's enforceable. So we should move it to Ecuador. And they signed 14 separate affidavits saying that they would be beholden to whatever judgment came out in Ecuador. So there was another, starting in 2001 or 2002, there was another case in Ecuador that finally ended in 2010 with first an $9 billion judgment that doubled after 15 days when Texaco, or Chevron then, refused to apologize for the damage they had caused. So they had the ability to half that amount. As of this point, so far they've spent over $2 billion on lawyers for the case. Right now, even though they've officially already lost the case, they have 2,000 lawyers and legal professionals working on it. They have some of the most brilliant and evil legal minds in the world going after their own shareholders who dared to file resolutions against them, going after nonprofits like Amazon Watch. We thankfully beat them this past spring, but just today they had a victory in which, although they weren't able to seize our institutional emails, my understanding of the verdict today is that they're now able to look at our personal Gmail accounts and get information from that to try to. They already have tens of thousands of emails from the lawyer Stephen Donziger, and it's just been, I think, essentially since the verdict in Ecuador, since this what turned into a $19 billion verdict, the focus has really been taken off of where it's needed, which is on the communities who, for 40 years, have continued to suffer. You know, sort of while all this legal wrangling's happening, and there are all of these sort of accusations on both sides. You know, the people on the ground are still suffering from Chevron's contamination. So it's really, there are arguments about whether, you know, the soil samples are correct, or about who paid who for what verdict. There are accusations that are on both sides. And I think what the undeniable fact is that Chevron purposefully and willfully poisoned 30,000 people in the Ecuadorian Amazon. That they did so in a way that they would save money, and they were the sole operator in that area for 26 years. So there have been. I'll show another really quick video. Sorry, I'll let you turn that on first. So for the past 12 years, we've been working with communities who have been impacted by Chevron's contamination in the northern Ecuadorian Amazon. And one of these people who is one of the colonos, one of the colonists I was referring to, is Servio Coripoma. And Servio moved to this area when he was 10 years old. A lot of it's based on Ecuador's agrarian reform laws. Sort of during the Cold War, instead of sort of doing land reform in an equitable way, they said, oh, we have all this empty land in the Amazon. You know, no one lives there. Like the indigenous people don't own it, even though they do. So let's allow to sort of get rid of some of the social pressure of poverty in big cities. Let's allow them to move into the Amazon. So that led to a lot of the environmental destruction, a lot of the roads being built, a lot of the rainforest being cut down for agriculture, and I think a lot of cultural destruction with indigenous people as well. But Servio, although he's not indigenous, has suffered a great deal and has fought for a long time to get justice in Ecuador. He lost both his parents and his sister-in-law to cancer that doctors attributed to drinking water contaminated by crude. And he came up for, it was actually his second time visiting the United States to face Chevron. And just a few days before he was supposed to come, his wife was in a car accident. Was sort of on this giant bus that was in a crash. And it turned out to not be fatal, and his daughter was able to take care of her so that he could come. He insisted on, I mean, we told him, you know, you really don't have to come, like, you should stay home and take care of your family, but he insisted on coming to be able to tell his story. So I organized all of the proxies and was able to get Servio, people who work with Amazon Watch, and representatives of Richmond community members into the meetings, who were confronting Chevron over a fire last August 6th that sent 15,000 people
Chevron in America, eat bagsa! Chevron all over the world, eat bagsa!
Chevron, barisan Chevron dah rismuan ini no akan lebat ke naik pada itu.
We want justice! We want justice! I say fire, y'all say Watson, fire! Watson! Fire! Watson!
Todavía niega, porque ya estamos incautando bienes en Canadá, Brasil y Argentina. Ese es el orgullo que tenemos como ecuatorianos.
While they continue to deny their role, we are seizing their assets in Argentina, in Canada, and Brazil, and we will take that last cent until they've paid us what they owe.
Y agradezco a los demás países que donde tienen bienes la Chevron, ahí vamos a incautar bienes para que paguen hasta el último centavo por el daño que causaron a la Amazonía ecuatoriana. Ese es el compromiso mío y de todos, de las 30,000 personas afectadas.
We will continue to follow Chevron around the world where it has its assets. We will take it to the last cent until they've paid us what they owe. This is our compromise. This is our fight as people affected by Chevron, and we will not give up.
Here's a little video of Sergio sort of telling his story.
Señor Watson.
Señor Watson.
Señor Watson.
Señor John Watson.
Mire lo que dejó su compañía, que hoy la representa.
Y vivo toda mi vida aquí en más de 40 años.
Por 38 años.
Hemos sufrido un grande fracaso.
Después vino la compañía, hasta causó las enfermedades.
Cáncer en la nariz.
A la garganta.
Bastantes granos en el cuerpo.
Dolores de estómago.
Los niños murieron por el cáncer por esta compañía.
El día que nacía mi hijo, se fue mi padre. Digo, y eso es duro para la familia.
Nosotros no queremos seguir muriendo con enfermedad cáncer.
One of the reasons why John Watson has not settled at this point, why he's sort of been, why he hasn't moved on his case, is because he was the person in charge of mergers and acquisitions when Chevron acquired Texaco, first back in 2000 and then when it was approved in 2001. So it's essentially his poor judgment, his failure, that's led to this huge liability. That's now the case that Chevron lost is now worth more than the entire value of Texaco when they purchased it. And in fact, a lot of people in the Ecuadorian Amazon, when the amount first came out of $19 billion, were upset that they didn't think that was enough. They were first pushing for $27 billion. And the fact is, no amount of money can reverse what happened in these communities, can bring back lives. No matter how much you spend, you can't undo the damage that was there. You can't return the rainforest to what it was. So I have a little rap. It has a little bit of Spanish in it as well. But just keep in mind that the name of the CEO of Chevron is John Watson. So that'll make more sense for it. So, yo, John Watson ain't Charlotte, but he'll know we're ready, because we got the power like Si Se Puede, campaigning for rights colectivamente, and harnessing la voz de la gente. Corporate injustice, y'all can't touch this. Protect nature's rights, because abuses disgust us. Backing local leaders who created a ruckus. Power to the people, our drive is rustless, because mad oppress has been known to suppress rights of people who try to progress. That's just why we can't acquiesce. In solidarity we fight, no peace, no rest. we still got standing up to do to the oil punks and the lawyers too, to all the suits with a whack world view. Protecting the Pachamama is what we do. Shareholder activism, this ain't naive pacifism, because of the board shareholders be asking them plenty of questions that really be tasking them about responsibility, real basic civility, questions of responsibility, sheer responsibility, one corporate responsibility, or at least capability to settle a suit dragging to infinity. Whether hostility means more susceptibility to more lawsuits if they don't change the policy, because forgetting abuses like senility and denying obvious culpability is going to be an exercise in futility. So that's that I wrote about Chevron was able to perform at the protest. And for me, it's one thing that's really interesting about this company is that it's been able to bring together a lot of groups because it has impacts all over the world. So for the past 12 years that we've worked on this, we've helped to form the True Cost of Chevron network. That's what Antonia used to lead. And I believe her book is right there, Tyranny of Oil. And so there are groups, there's a group called Justice in Nigeria Now that has pursued Chevron for the deaths it's caused in Nigeria with gas flaring, with oil rigs that have blown up, with causing conflict between families. There are groups in the Philippines, in Burma, in Alaska, in California right now, where in addition to Richmond and the 15,000 people that Chevron sent to the hospital, they're pursuing fracking now. And one thing that's particularly interesting about the Richmond example is that Chevron has been able to turn Richmond into a company town. They spent over $1 million on the last mayoral election of Richmond, which is unheard of. They spent, I think it was 50 times what the opposition spent, and they still lost. To Gail McLaughlin, who's an amazing mayor, Green Party mayor, and has been speaking at every protest against Chevron. They've still been able to buy a lot of city council seats, and that's one of the reasons why, and buy off a lot of the Chemical Safety Board. And that's one of the reasons why they were only asked finally a year afterwards to pay, after 3,000 people protested and 210 people got arrested at this last protest on August 6th, they were asked to pay $2 million, which I think for sending 15,000 people to the hospital and for a corporation that has annual profits of $24 billion is not enough money. So they're, through these visits of Ecuadorians coming over the past 12 years, going to the annual shareholders meeting, we've been able to build a lot of solidarity between communities who are affected here, communities in Texas who are affected by the refineries there, really communities all over the world. And I think that's something that we're going to continue pushing. Excuse me. There's actually a petition. You can go to truecostofchevron.com, and we also have these pink slips right here. You might have seen a giant pink slip in the video where we're asking for John Watson to be fired. And if I'm going to be totally honest with you, we don't expect that the board is going to fire their CEO over a petition. But I think it is a really nice way to gather all of the concerns and all of the different groups who have issues with Chevron, and to be able to sort of present that in one place, and to put that in the media. So although it didn't lead to our protest and our petitions didn't lead to his firing, it led to stories in Forbes and stories in the San Francisco Chronicle, which, especially surprising for Forbes, were very critical of Chevron. So I think that with this case, we're continuing to shine the light on. So let me step back a second. Actually, I'll show you a quick video, if possible. Sorry, I keep going back and forth between video and not, of what Amazon Watch does, because one of the things that we do is we hold corporations responsible for past damage, but another sort of perhaps what we do more of is working to stop future damage from occurring. So right now, for example, I'm working on a campaign in which, so the entire northern Ecuadorian Amazon right now has been contaminated by Chevron. And afterwards by the shoddy infrastructure that left in place. Sort of in addition to drilling in a really cheap way, Chevron created a pipe system in Ecuador which has an oil spill on average once a week. So in addition to their intentional negligence, sort of their legacy has been left behind them, in which there are these, between 2000 and 2010, there were about 500 spills because of the cheap infrastructure that they left. I'll speak more about this other oil route after that, but I'm going to first pull up this video about Amazon Watch. Sorry.
7 billion people now share this magnificent biosphere we call planet Earth. At its equator, an emerald green belt of tropical rainforests is critical to maintaining the planet's fragile balance. The world's largest tropical rainforest is the Amazon, often likened to the lungs of our living, breathing planet. Whether they know it or not, each of the 7 billion people on Earth counts on the vast Amazon rainforest to regulate our planet's climate, absorbing carbon dioxide and generating a full fifth of the world's oxygen and fresh water. The biological riches of the Amazon are unsurpassed, with an unfathomable diversity of birds and animals, insects and fish, trees and plants. Countless species are yet to be discovered, possibly holding the key to curing illnesses such as cancer and AIDS. The Amazon rainforest: medicine, oxygen, water, food, life. And yet, this life-giving, climate-stabilizing, biological treasure is in great danger, threatened by industrial civilization's voracious appetite for its resources. Pipelines and oil roads slice into the rainforest, opening it to logging, mining, and oil drilling. Massive dams, industrial plantations, and cattle grazing bring further devastation. Deforestation in the Amazon now releases more carbon than U.S. automobiles. But local people are standing against this destruction, and they need our help now more than ever before. The indigenous people of the Amazon are on the front lines, forest guardians defending their culture and communities while protecting the precious forests. For over 15 years, Amazon Watch has stood with these proud stewards of the rainforest, building unprecedented alliances, stopping destructive projects, and fighting for a more just and sustainable future.
Queremos nuestras madres, nuestras abuelas y nuestras hijas, nuestros hijos, podamos vivir una vida más digna y posible para nuestra generación.
In Brazil, Amazon Watch is standing with the indigenous communities along the Xingu, fighting a monstrous mega dam planned for this tributary of the mighty Amazon. This high-profile battle between destructive development and the potential of a green energy future for Brazil is galvanizing millions around the world. In Peru, Amazon Watch is helping the Achuar of the Corrientes River basin demand cleanup of widespread oil pollution, while standing with other Achuar communities who have witnessed oil's toxic legacy in the rainforest and are saying no to oil drilling in their pristine ancestral territory. In Ecuador, Amazon Watch has been at the forefront of the fight to hold oil giant Chevron accountable for its devastation of the rainforest. $18 billion court verdict against the company in 2011 sent shockwaves through the industry. And Amazon Watch is committed to standing with the communities of the Ecuadorian Ecuadorian Amazon until they get justice. In Colombia, Amazon Watch has long stood with the Uwa people, who successfully resisted Occidental Petroleum's plans to drill in their territory, inspiring the world with their courage and commitment. Across the Amazon basin, in corporate boardrooms and in the face of powerful interests, Amazon Watch has proven a force to be reckoned with.
Our sense is, as go these groups, essentially goes the Amazon, and that has global implications.
And today, Amazon Watch is advancing the rights of local communities, helping to build a global movement of forest guardians, bringing clean water to oil-ravaged communities, and promoting renewable energy for the Amazon. But the Amazon and its inhabitants face an alarming convergence of threats. Now more than ever, they and we need your help. For the sake of indigenous people, whose cultures have much to teach our modern world about living in harmony with the earth, and whose very survival hangs in the balance. For the sake of our global climate, the air we breathe, the water that makes life possible on this majestic planet. For the sake of future generations, Amazon Watch needs your support. Learn how you can help at amazonwatch.org.
I'd be glad to sort of speak about any work beyond Chevron, or if you guys have any questions about Chevron or anything else. Just be like a conversation.
Yeah, I have a couple questions. Maybe I'll put them both back to back and you can answer it.
Yeah.
Which one? First one. So in regards to, I know there was in Argentina and some other countries they froze their Chevron assets, but then maybe about a month and a half ago, their courts distinguished between Chevron Argentina and Chevron International and decided that they couldn't hold them accountable for it because they were two separate corporations, and so then released all the assets. And then also just looking at how the political landscape in Ecuador now has changed, and with this feeling of we need to raise money whatever way we can, and in some ways it seems, I'm just kind of curious to get your perspective on it, because it seems that maybe like the past couple months things maybe politically within South America seem to be, South and Central seem to be shifting away, possibly. So that's one question. And the second question is to the, I believe it's the 2nd District in New York, which is yes. So like a month and a half ago, or maybe something like this, I was reading an article one place, and they were really talking about Goldinger and just all the things being filed like consistently. There was no way he could keep up with it. He was losing he had lawyers that were defending him backing out, and that he was, basically completely screwed. And then I saw this one other article that I could only find on one site. I think it was the Chevron bit. Okay, yeah. About how he had filed for a review of the judge, and it had been, and this came out like 2 days, within 2 days of the other article, and it was saying he was doomed, Kaplan, it's all over for this guy. And this one was saying that then the review panel did agree that there were several things that Kaplan had decided which looked like outrightly that he was doing more than just bending things in Chevron's favor. But then I didn't see any follow-up article from that. So I know those are kind of different topics, but I'm just kind of curious about how things have progressed in the past couple months.
Definitely. I can. First of all, I'm really impressed by your knowledge on the case.
Oh, well, I wrote on the summer show, and so we dealt with it. So
nice.
Yeah, it's kind of funny now, because now that we opened in July, and the research has kind of stopped, but for months it was like every day looking for the newest article and figuring it out.
I think honestly I'm in a similar place, because while I organized the protest at the shareholders meeting in May, I've been primarily working on this new oil round since then. But I can do my best to answer the questions.
Yeah.
I'll start with the last one. Actually, I just heard a press release 2 days ago that Judge Kaplan is trying to avoid going to a jury trial. And essentially, there's this judge in New York in the second district, this federal judge, Justice Louis A. Kaplan, who's really gone out of his way to rule in favor of Chevron. When the case first, so there's been this RICO case, which is racketeering and corruption, in which Chevron is essentially trying to reverse the sentence, reverse the $19 billion ruling by saying that it was obtained in some illegal or improper way. And there have also been accusations on the other side, which I think have a lot more merit, saying that Chevron has actually killed people in Ecuador over this case, that they have bought witnesses' homes in the United States and spies' homes, and regularly give them paychecks, and to judges as well. So there's been like a lot of mudslinging back and forth on both sides, but Chevron's had a lot more legal power to have 2,000 lawyers and legal professionals working on the case. So, as you were mentioning, they've been able to sort of file motion after motion, to the point where there have actually been threats of sanctions, because their strategy is just to overwhelm the court. So they just say, okay, like, oh, yeah, we'll allow it, or we'll let you go with this, or let you have this. So this last part was Justice Kaplan has, first of all, the trailer you saw was for the movie Crude, and Judge Kaplan, in sort of in unprecedented motion, allowed Chevron's legal team to have all of the outtakes to that film. There were 600 hours of outtakes, and despite any sort of First Amendment arguments, he said that he gave over, essentially, all of these private documents to Chevron. He's also done that with tens of thousands of emails. He's gone so far as to regularly call the plaintiffs so-called indigenous peoples, so-called plaintiffs from Lago Agrio. Lago Agrio is the sort of big oil town. It's actually named after Lago Agrio literally translates into Sour Lake, which is the town in Texas where Texaco was founded. So that's just like sort of some symbolism that shows how much of an influence they've had on the Ecuadorian Amazon. But in regards, so the legal team that's been supporting these 30,000 plaintiffs in Ecuador, their latest strategy has been to try to get Justice Kaplan off the case, because for the reasons I just mentioned, he's completely biased.
I mean, doesn't anybody say, I'm sorry, he's insulting people. He's deliberately insulting people in public, and that's clear bias.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been sort of claims of cultural insensitivity, of that he essentially doesn't think that the Ecuadorians are people.
Yeah.
And Chevron has gone to sort of, they've tried to act insulted because I called them out on that on their blogs, and said that Kaplan has gone out of the way. So sort of in their opposition to that, have pulled up Amazon Watch's blogs and other people's blogs to say that there's been a lot of mudslinging from, advocates of people in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And they've tried to make connections between their accusation against us was that we were working with the legal team, which we're not. We're working with people on the ground who are continuing to suffer 40 years after the fact from their contamination. So I think it's still unsettled as to whether Justice Kaplan will continue to be on the case. I hope he gets kicked off very soon. And I'll answer your question about Yasuni as well, which I think has been on a lot of people's minds over the past week. On Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Quito time, the president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, said that he was abandoning sort of this revolutionary initiative in which the industrialized world would have paid Ecuador to keep oil under the ground in the most biodiverse place on the planet, which is this area called Yasuni ITT. And ITT is an acronym for the 3 oil fields that are under this area that's, I think, just about 7,000 hectares. in the eastern Ecuadorian Amazon. Just in that space, within actually 1 hectare of that area, there are more tree species than there are in all of the United States and Canada combined. There's many reptile species as there are in in the entire park. There's many reptile species as there are in all of Europe, I think. And just like it's a place that survived the Ice Age. So there are all of these species that don't exist in any other place on the planet that exist in this place called Yasuni. And there are many reasons why the initiative failed. This past Thursday, as I was mentioning, the president essentially declared it dead, and he blamed the industrialized world for not paying up. The deal was that that Ecuador would have gotten $7.2 billion from extracting oil from that area. And so they said, if you pay us half of that, we won't touch it. The initiative first started in 2007, and I guess ended on Thursday, although there have been movements to put it to a referendum to allow Ecuadorians to vote on it, because recent polls right before the president called it dead announced that 93% of Ecuadorians supported the initiative. And I think it's honestly partly that the industrialized world did not contribute, and we should have. I think in terms of actual cash, the industrialized world contributed like $13 million out of the $3.6 billion, and in promises and debt relief and things like that, there were about $336 million. And a lot of that was from celebrities, people like Bill Gates and Leonardo DiCaprio and Edward Norton, and a lot of it was not from the United States. And the United Kingdom gave nothing. But there are there's a lot that President Correa has done to undermine the initiative as well. Right now, he's trying to auction off an area that's 25 times the size of Yasuni ITT. An area that's 8 million acres of the Ecuadorian Amazon, and that's the main campaign I've been working on. It's called Ecuador's 11th Oil Round. So essentially the entire Amazon that wasn't contaminated by Texaco, he's trying to sell off to oil companies. So that undermines the credibility a lot of this initiative that, if countries actually pay to preserve it, that he would keep his word. There are also issues that Correa defaulted on a $3 billion debt to the IMF, which I personally agree he should have defaulted on, because it was, at that point, he was paying interest. But for international financial institutions and for major donors, it's not something that leads to a lot of credibility. Another issue is that there's this area called Yasuni National Park that Yasuni ITT lies within. And a lot of people think that the initiative was to preserve this entire national park. But it was President Correa, there are 5 active oil blocks within this national park, which is technically unconstitutional and illegal, but has been happening since 1993, that there have been 180-kilometer oil roads going into this. So just recently in 2012, the government started developing a block that was right on the border of Yasuni ITT, and Correa was regularly speaking about a plan B, what we would do if the world didn't pay up. So that didn't inspire a great deal of confidence either. And I think something that's difficult is that sort of in the progressive world, Correa is seen as the savior. Someone who's taken on the West, who's taken on imperialism. And in a lot of ways that's true. That Correa has been able to renegotiate oil royalties so that Ecuador gets a better deal. He's been able to kick the U.S. naval base out of Ecuador, that he's given a big FU to the IMF and to other financial institutions, that he's had this Chavista rhetoric that you see in Bolivia and in Venezuela. That Julian Assange is at is at their embassy in London, and a number of other things. But when it comes to indigenous rights and environmental issues, it's still been based on this extractivist model that is all about funding the development of the country based upon the backs of indigenous peoples and the environment. And honestly, like, there is no one solution right now that, in terms of pure cash, can replace extractive industry in Ecuador. There's nothing that you can say tomorrow will entirely replace over a third of our economy, over a third of Ecuador's economy. But it's been done in a way that's been without the consultation of indigenous peoples, without their consent, and they, as you saw in the case of Texaco and Chevron, has really devastated communities. And now that's, in some ways, that and worse could happen in the rest of the Ecuadorian Amazon, because in this area called the Yasuni ITT, which the government just sort of gave the green light to exploit, they said starting within a few weeks. Although there are delays right now because civil society within Ecuador has been taken to the streets and has called for this popular referendum. There are groups that are living in voluntary isolation, which, like the groups who were there before Texaco came, could be entirely wiped out if oil drilling begins. There's actually been recently, over all these roads being built and these pipelines being built in the area, there have been conflicts between communities. There's a group called the Wairani, which is a large indigenous nationality in Ecuador, and there are subgroups of Wairani that the nomadic groups that live in voluntary isolation that are called uncontacted tribes. And they sort of historically have seen the Wairani as their protectors, as people who wouldn't allow the outside world, wouldn't allow oil development to sort of disturb their lives. So a couple of months back, there were two Wairani who were walking along an oil road, and they were killed by two people from this community in voluntary isolation. And before they died, they were able to tell the other Wairani that as they were killing them, the people in the uncontacted group were complaining about, the sound from helicopters that was scaring away all the monkeys and all the birds, and that they were starving because they couldn't eat, and that it was destroying their way of life, and why hadn't they protected them? And so there was a reprisal then from the Wairani where they killed dozens of people from this uncontacted group. And it's really this extractive industry that's created tensions between groups that are the same nationality, come from the same nation. So in addition to it's sad, it's terrible that it's the most biodiverse place on the planet. But I think where I come from more is that these are people who are losing their lives, losing their communities, losing their livelihoods. And that's really sad. Yeah. It's actually under the Ecuadorian Constitution. That's they define it as ethnocide, and that is that's what's happening right now. Yeah, there are these great interviews happening now with sort of some of the opposition in Ecuadorian civil society.
So when you say wiped out, do you mean that they're just kind of killed off, or they just kind of ran out of town type of thing, or is it like a little bit of both?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is that a lot of these communities who've chosen to live in voluntary isolation don't have immunity to a lot of the diseases that oil workers have, or that we have. So it's sort of a replay of what happened with the conquista in the 1400s and the 1500s, colonization. That's part of it. Another part is just there's a cultural death. in terms of once alcohol starts coming in, once prostitution starts coming in, once roads come in, once there's this huge amount of just one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and yeah, money that traditionally communities haven't been like, they haven't been commodified, that they, and when, I think even, what's interesting is that even, you know, in the Chevron case, like before this legal case, a lot of these communities were living without any concept of money. Or maybe before Chevron came to town, and now for a lot of them there's a sense that they need it, even for a lot of the most traditional societies, and that a lot of this oil development, gas development, mining has created that dependence, that where in the past these communities lived complete, and a lot of them still do to a much larger degree than we do, where communities live completely in touch with nature, in harmony with it, and are able to sort of get what they need in a really sustainable way.
Except that the land is being poisoned, the water is being poisoned, so...
Yeah, exactly.
So they're now dying off the land rather than living off of it.
Right, so it creates this, when they're no longer able to hunt and gather for a living, it creates this dependence on other, that they have to move away from the land and move to, you know, go work for the oil companies sometimes.
Right.
Which is, I think, interestingly, something that I went to Alberta. We did some solidarity work with communities who were impacted by the tar sands there. Mm-hmm. And it was something that you sort of see economic hostages there as well.
When I first came here, I got very involved with Big Mountain Support in Arizona. And some of the, again, it's, we can have lots and lots of conversation about economic necessity versus the environment. Some of the very traditional grandmas at the, 20 years ago when I was involved, they had the sheep, they did the weaving, they spoke the language and all that, but their son worked at the Peabody Coal Company. Yeah. And that was the only job available. And the same with the stuff that's going on in Appalachia about the mining and habitat removal especially, and all that destroying the land, and all that environmental diversity of Appalachia, but coal is the only job happening.
Yeah.
And people are starting to say, why is coal the only job happening?
Well, here you've got this whole community in Richmond that was affected, and it's a time bomb over there because of the plant itself.
Yeah.
And yet there's millions of people in this local Bay Area that might empathize but don't connect the dots. And so my question is, how do we connect the dots on a level around the world that people can be activated?
I think that's a great question. I don't know if I have a great answer for it.
Just what you do, I guess.
Yeah, I think that everyone connects in a different way to these stories. I think personally, seeing a human face is something that creates much more of a connection for me than sort of the somewhat abstract concept of climate change or something like that. That's important, but it's harder to connect to on an emotional level. I think that people are often the biggest impediment that I see. I used to, for years before this, worked on anti-genocide campaigns. And I think that people were sort of really overwhelmed and I think depressed by it, and were afraid that what they did couldn't make a difference. There's a sense that we're dealing with powerful forces that have unlimited amounts of money, and whatever we do in some sense is a drop in the bucket. And to be fair, there's some truth to that. But I think that there's also a lot of truth that whatever we do is part of a larger picture. I used to intern on Capitol Hill, and I would be the person who, when you wrote in, would return your letters. And I noticed that whenever we received 10 letters on one issue, we would have to speak about it. You know, we'd have to, for everyone, we'd have to answer it. But if we kept receiving letters, I'd have to speak to the legislative aides, and if it got to a certain amount, I'd speak to the congressman and say, you know, what's our response on this? Are we going to have to change it? And I think that, you know, it's frustrating that Congress in particular is at a point right now where sometimes it seems like there can't be any change no matter what you do. But I can just say from having a little bit of an inside view that it does matter, and that we just have to mobilize more than the big companies, than groups like NRA, than all of these huge, powerful interests. That they're, you know, motivated by a huge amount of profit and greed, but we don't really have the people power. And if every person who cared about these issues took a stand, then it would be no contest. You know, one thing that always sticks with me is Representative John Lewis, the civil rights hero, said that during Rwanda, that if every member of Congress had received 100 letters saying that we needed to do something, then something would have happened. That the U.S. would have stepped in to end the genocide. And I think, like, maybe today it takes more than 100 letters, maybe it takes 1,000, you know, but we can do it. And I think that's something that's really stuck with me. Also, with Archbishop Oscar, there are two quotes that really, I think, a couple things. I think that there needs to be, you need to realize that you can't do it all, and that there's so, like, for example, I'm working on indigenous rights and environmental justice right now, and I care about it, but I don't have the emotional strength to every weekend go out to protest about different issues. Just to be able to sort of preserve myself. I think there needs to be a certain amount of being, sort of following the serenity prayer, with being all right with what you can do, and as Archbishop Oscar Romero said, like, planting the seeds, and, you know, watching that we're priests, not prophets, that that it may be in the next generation that it comes along, or the generation after that, but we're starting the cycle. We're, I think, sort of guarding a legacy that past generations have passed on to us, that, as Dr. King said, you know, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. That if you think about, you know, before women had the right to vote, when there was actual legal slavery, when, before the labor movement, and nowadays, a lot of times it seems like those rights are being reversed, but just to take, like, a long historical perspective, sometimes it's nice to see how far we've come, and how far there still is yet to go.
Good answer.
Seems to have been a lot of, well, not a lot of, but a pattern of successful protests in this area, environmentally, with Chevron or Keystone stuff, and it feels like there's some momentum that's been going there, and some maybe like more coordination between different organizations sort of working on that. And I was kind of curious if that's the perspective you have, and then probably more importantly, like what are the ones, the dates that are kind of a little bit off in the distance now to start working towards getting people up for?
I mean, honestly, because I moved to the Bay Area in January, I don't have a great sense of where things were before versus where they are now. But I can say that, sorry, I'm pulling Marco Rubio. Can say that I think that there have been some groups that have been great coordinating groups. I think with the Chevron shareholders meeting, it's usually Amazon Watch that sort of pulls groups together. I think with the recent rally in Richmond, I think a lot of that was due to 350 and how they have a huge list and put a lot of work into it. But I think it's for every protest, it's about different. I think one reason why the True Cost of Chevron network has been successful is because it's all these different issues coming together. People coming from different points, and that you have to be able to be a little bit flexible to be able to plug people in. I think that message discipline is important, and it has its place. But I think creating an inclusive movement, especially if you're able to sort of frame those messages in a way that it all has an Uber message, is something that's important. I don't know if that really answered the question, but
yeah, the first part of it. And I guess the second part of are there any big protests that are being planned on the horizons, and what dates?
Yeah. So right now, with this, we don't have firm dates on protests for. We're organizing protests against this new oil round in Ecuador. There was a huge protest. There's a huge protest happening tomorrow, actually, in Quito, against the president's decision to exploit Yasuni. So I had a call. We're working with Avaz.org and a couple of other groups to think about how strategically, thinking about maybe series of protests at embassies or consulates.
It'll be on your website.
Yeah, definitely. And if you sign up for, if you want to sign that petition, then I can get your info and let you know as soon as I do about dates. Yeah, all those petitions right there are eventually that you can also do it online at truecostofchevron.com, or you can sign these, which are pink slips for John Watson. That will, I think, once we have thousands and thousands of them, we already have a few thousand, but perhaps once we have over 15,000 or 18,000, we'll deliver them and serve this great media opportunity.
I'm not sure how to put this. I'm used to being an activist and fighting for justice over many, many, many years. And there's always been the good guys and the bad guys, and the super powerful, greedy people are the bad guys, and the people who have less and fighting for the good people.
Yeah.
Something that shifted for me over the years and to where we are right now is that it seems like, so it's like winners and losers, But the irony is that, at this point, the rich and powerful and greedy people who we are fighting against to fight for social justice, in many ways, I see them as being not just harming us and others, the indigenous people and the poor people and all the above, but they're being self-destructive, and we're kind of like all going to go off the cliff together.
Yeah.
And so one of the confusing things for me is like, how do we wake them up? Because they're in a state of, for lack of a better term, denial about what they're doing. They're just seeing they want to win, they want to be greedy, they want to be powerful, but I don't think very many of them are even aware of the fact how self-destructive they are being to their own families, future generations. So it's, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure what the question I'm asking is, but.
I mean, I don't know if I have a better answer than anyone else, but I think a major problem is short-sightedness, both in politics and in corporate accountability.
And denial.
Yeah, denial. I feel like on some level, you know, even the most staunch deniers of climate change, or the people who sort of take the greatest benefit from perpetuating it, or creating it, are people who on some level know that it exists, know that perhaps what they're doing is wrong. I think there's a lot of, like, to be honest, like, even I have great job security because the Amazon is being threatened, because indigenous peoples are being threatened. So I think it's easy for us to, like, point fingers, but I think what we do in our own lives is also, like, I don't know how to voice it, but that I don't personally would like to be out of a job because of that. I'd like, you know, the Amazon to be saved and for indigenous peoples to not be bothered. But I think that's how I'm getting paid. So I think just looking at our own privilege and what we depend upon for our own livelihoods is something that's important as well. And how we're, you know, in terms of what we do in our daily lives, and I'm by no means perfect in that, you know, how we're a part of the problem as well.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.